topics that we're supposed to talk about here are the Boeing and Airbus order books realistic, and can the supply chain keep up with production, and should the supply chain invest in increased production rates? What are the industry's workforce challenges? Is there a danger of increased protectionism that could slow growth in the long-haul airliner market? Will infrastructure, such as airports, be able to keep up with traffic growth? And what are the pain points there? And what are really the best financial strategies for airlines in this age of fluctuating oil prices and currencies and such? So let me briefly introduce our panelists. Danje Kodic is Chief Executive of Air Serbia, at the far end, a position he has held since Etihad acquired a 49% stake in the airline in 2013. He has more than 25 years of international experience in the travel industry, began his career at Qantas Airways, and was Southeast Asia Regional Director for Sabre Airline Solutions prior to joining Air Serbia. Richard, next to him, next to him is Alex Thursby, Group Chief Executive of the National Bank of Abu Dhabi, a position he has held since mid-2013. And under his leadership, the bank has been recognized as one of the safest in the Middle East. He has an extensive banking career in Hong Kong, Indonesia, Singapore, the UK, and now the UAE. Next to Alex is Arif Wibowo, President and CEO of Garuda, Indonesia, a position he assumed 15 months ago. He actually began his career as a mechanical engineer in the airline's maintenance shop. And over the years, he's rose through the ranks in marketing, sales, international relations, and senior management. And next to me, Richard Welford, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at TATA Technologies. And Richard has nearly 3 decades of industry experience, including 11 years at TATA. He began his career as a technical apprentice at Jaguar Cars before earning a degree in mechanical engineering. So, welcome, gentlemen. I'll set the stage here. We had just talked, I was talking in the last session with Mark Allen of Boeing International about some comments Airbus's John Leahy made that the airliner industry, in terms of hardware, is no longer a cyclical industry. Yet there are some really worrying trends out there. China's GDP growth is slowing. Brazil and Russia are in major downturns. The rising US dollar has made airplanes, which are priced in dollars, and maintenance more expensive. The drop in oil prices has made it less imperative for airlines to retire older gas-guzzling jets. Some not very established airlines have ordered a lot of new jets, which raises questions: will they be able to take delivery in a few years? And some of the forecasters are saying the good times are sort of plateauing. Teal Group says the value of jetliner deliveries rose just 2% last year and will rise about the same this year, compared with increases averaging 7% between 2010 and 14. So signs of bad times ahead, right? Well, you also have to consider that Airbus and Boeing are sitting on a combined backlog of nearly 13,000 aircraft. That's double from 2007, quadruple from 1998. These backlogs served as a real cushion during the global economic downturn, 2008 and 2009, and the two airframers barely paused then. Airbus is planning to increase A320 family production to 60 jets per month by mid-2019, up from just 42 last year's. And so, you know, the real question is which view is correct. So let me start with you, Richard. I mean, should the suppliers invest away?
Thanks, Jim. It's a good question. So I come from an engineering services company. So, you know, we're not a manufacturing supplier ourselves, but we are part of a very large manufacturing group, the TATA Group. And so a lot of manufacturing businesses, of course, within our group, including those that are supplying various parts of the aerospace industry. And of course, we do a lot of business to support our customers, our suppliers themselves. So it's the invest away is always an interesting challenge, and of course, at the top of the tree, it's an easy challenge to give out, as to, well, please follow us on this journey. And I think Boeing are declaring no cyclical nature, no bubble, and therefore very easy to give comments such as invest away as suppliers. However, of course, from a supplier perspective, you need to make sure that you're also being careful that whatever you're investing in is ultimately sustainable. And should there be some market turbulence, then there are options, of course, for you to manage your costs, and your overheads haven't got out of control at that point. So I think the key flavor for me would be enjoy the optimism of the top of the tree, but at the same time make sure that your model for response is flexible enough such that if it's not quite as accurate as it might seem, then of course you have a way of responding.
So be very careful.
Be careful.
Okay. Let's get a little bit about the airline perspective. Alex, what are you telling airlines in terms of fuel hedging? When do you hedge?
Well, I guess on a broader platform, running an airline, we have a speciality in aviation. It's we all know it's one of the toughest industries. And on the optimistic side, we see a continuation of huge growth, providing all the facilitators around airport administration, airport building, traffic, global traffic systems, etc. We see that possibly by 2035 that there could be up to 7 billion annual passenger flights. So from that perspective, it's very good. What I think an airline has great difficulty in is that major components of its cost base, particularly if it's an international airline, its foreign exchange, is hugely variable. Its interest rate policy, and airlines are, versus other industries, leveraged at about 50 to 60% more than most other industries. And of course fuel, which has been traditionally a huge component, are subject to market fluctuation. So I think there is a huge, complex set of factors that have to be managed by an airline. So specifically, let's take fuel as your question. The competitiveness of airlines now is looking like those who hedged and those who did not. In addition, airlines have to consider the revaluation of their hedges. And 15, 20 years ago, you were seeing airlines, mainly in the Far East, hedging 3-5 years fuel. And when fuel went down and they were locked in, they had massive, what I call mark-to-market valuation adjustments, which affected capital, affected earnings, and did not affect cash flow, but it did affect competitive position. So fuel is so important because if you hedge and you don't hedge, and one gets it right, one gets it wrong, it actually affects your competitive position. And unfortunately, price elasticity is not, is very fragmented. When is a good time to hedge? That's the shape of the curves. It's a very important decision making, and there is no easy answer. My feeling at the moment is if I see oil below $30, I would hedge for up to 3 years. But there are many pundits out there who are suggesting that oil could be under $50 for 5 years. The problem is no one knows. So it's a little bit of luck and a little bit of guessing. And that's the concerning piece for a commercial airline. That 2 or 3 important items that you hedge, foreign exchange, fuel, and interest rates, are huge movers of your success or non-success as an airline. And it is a problem for the industry as a whole.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating. You're right. It's so easy to get it wrong. I remember, just a few years ago, some Wall Street analysts predicting oil would be at $200 a barrel. made a very convincing case about the growth of the middle class in places like India and China to back that up, and obviously the opposite happened. Arif, we were talking backstage about your hedging experience. What are you guys doing?
Yeah, of course, as a leader in airline business, always two kind of challenge we have to face. First is the strong headwind of the economic growth, strong headwind on the currencies issues. But of course, we've been benefited from the fuel as the tailwind. And we do hedge very carefully because at a time, at the beginning of 2015, we do partly for the hedge because I'm still wait and see whether the price of oil will be prolonged for being low or not. That is why we just start with on like 10%, then move to the 20%, and at the end of Q2 last year, we did only 27%. After that, we just follow the volatility of the oil price. That's why I think at the same time, we also do hedge partly for the currencies because we have to consider how is the top line source of the revenue. Because now, for instance, like me, as a Garuda operations, 55% rupiah revenue, and then 45% from non-rupiah. And among the non-rupiah revenue, we rely on the US dollar around 30%. Then the other hard currency is really impacted by the US dollar, strengthening. Then we do some kind of currency hedging as well at the same time. But we have to do very, very careful on this because this is very risky, and we do really, consider time to time, minutes by minutes, how is the volatility for both either oil price or even the currency rate.
Okay. We talked about the fuel. Another big thing is currency, as you guys said. You're from Indonesia. The aircraft are priced in US dollars, and the Indonesian currency is down about 40%, I believe, in the last 4 or 5 years against the dollar. So some airlines order airplanes, and when they go to take delivery, they're 40% more expensive. How are you coping with the change in the US dollar?
Yeah, the first thing, we do some action. We do also cross-currency swap. And then second, in terms of aggressively sales into the marketplace, because we are aiming to be, stronger market share in the market. Because the only way, we have to make sure the volume-wise, we can get it more. That is why last year, even though the average price on us, or we can say the yield on average is a little bit decreased, but the total traffic is increasing more than 13%. This is quite important because the market share on us improved from 37% in domestic and increased up to the 45%. Means this is to cover as a portfolio strategy in order to make sure that the top line has to be maintained.
Okay. Does the change in currency make you less likely to buy new airplanes, to order new airplanes?
European? Oh, new plane, sorry. Yeah, of course. What we are planning is not in the short, but we are thinking of, the fleet plan on the 10 years onward. If we are talking about the plan on us, we have to keep maintaining the growth in terms of the capacity. If we have to naturally, replace the airplane, we still need it more, not the only narrow body, but we also need to add it more wide body airplane. And we put it around 5% compounded annual growth rate up to the next 10 years onward. It means that we still need to add more airplane in the next upcoming 10 years onward. Of course, what we have to do in regard with the additional of the airplane, we have to make sure that our balance is quite strong enough, and we have to select the option of maybe we still keep maintaining our operating lease as the majority portion of the total fleet cost.
Danya, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about the Air Serbia story? I mean, Air Serbia was pretty close to bankruptcy when Etihad invested in them. Where are you now? And I was also wondering if you could talk about the Etihad Airways Partners. You're a member of that. What is Etihad Airways Partners, and how does it benefit Air Serbia?
Thanks, Joe. Here's a fact about our airline. Next year, we'll be celebrating our 90th anniversary, and that makes us about the 8th oldest airline in the world, which is a little known fact. If I take the clock back to 2013, when a decision was made between the government of Serbia and Etihad Airways to form a partnership to turn the then Yacht Airways into Air Serbia as it is today, had that deal not have happened, Yacht Airways wouldn't have lived to see its 88th birthday, let alone its 90th birthday next year. So that's the context and the backdrop. It was in a very poor state of disrepair. I remember it well. I remember walking around and seeing the state of property and real estate. I'm surprised George Miller didn't pick it to be the scene for Mad Max. That's how bad the buildings were. It was a state of post-apocalyptic, God knows what. And it was hard. It was a hard situation. Of course, the country went through difficulty as well in the 90s, which reflected itself in the airline. So the deal was important because it saved the airline. When we actually entered into the airline, and again, the day was rather auspicious because it was September 11, 2013, we had 6 weeks until we were going to make our maiden flight to Abu Dhabi on the 26th of October. So we had 6 weeks, in effect, to refleet, rebrand, retrain, and resize. And those of you who are sitting out there who are in the airline space will know how difficult it is to do one of those things, let alone all four in a short period of 6 weeks. We managed to do that though, and the secret to our success was both shareholders being aligned around the vision they had for the business. And again, if those of you who have worked with engaged shareholders, you'll know how important it is to have shareholders aligned, sharing the same vision for the business. And I was very fortunate that we had that in our business, which made the job of management that much easier to realise the vision and head for the finish line. So our journey has been rapid. Of course, we started with a low base, and so the journey upwards was an easier one, not easy, but an easier one. But nonetheless, it's been challenging against the backdrop and the environment that we operate within. Having said that, 2.5 years down the road, what have we achieved? Essentially, we've doubled the size of the airline. When we entered the airline, it was carrying 1.2 million passengers. Last year, we closed the year out with 2.55 million, which is a significant improvement on where things were. We've increased our profitable situation. I mean, again, the first year we closed the year out with minus 73 or 73 million euro loss, and at the end of our first year we reported a 2.7 million profit. The auditors are currently doing their work at the moment, but all indications are that we will make another profit again this year. So the journey has been great, and had it not been for Etihad, we wouldn't be here today talking about Air Serbia, which is a good segue into the point around the Etihad Airway Partners proposition. I think enough has been said around that, but and obviously what underpins the partnership or the grouping is the fact that Etihad has an equity stake in each of the airlines. So it's something different, you know, to the traditional airline alliances, which are they are more marketing orientated than not. Our alliance, our partnership, I should say, is something different because it provides real tangible value to the customer, but it provides real tangible benefit to each airline. For example, we're a small airline of 20 aircraft, and on our own it's very hard to get scale, but being part of a grouping that has 700 aircraft, flies to over 300 destinations and carries more than 100 million people makes a difference. And it's best exemplified in the following. We made an announcement last year in November that we would be launching our first long-haul destination. We'd be commencing Belgrade to New York services in June of this year. A small airline like us, like the airline we are, would have never the ability to do that, but not for being part of something bigger. So we're in the throes of finalising a lease for an aircraft from Jet Airways. We've been training our pilots at Alitalia, and our cabin crew have been trained here in Abu Dhabi. And I think that best demonstrates the value of that partnership for us.
Thanks for that story. Protectionism.
I think there's another. I think the model that Etihad has created, my sense of where it's going is it's really disruptive for the rest of the industry. And the success of the timing of when I think Etihad went into ventures which were under duress, I think has turned out to be correct. But there are also many other effects from a banker's point of view. It allows the other parts, the other airlines, to access funds from where they traditionally couldn't. It would have been very difficult for Air Serbia to access funds in a competitive manner from the international financial markets on a standalone basis. So they've been able to do that. Secondly, they've been able to potentially pool as a group all of their variable costs through interest rates, energy, and currency, and be able to, I think, in the long run, create a pooled hedging strategy that again will get more efficiency than they would be as component airlines. So the model, and there's going to be some natural offsets from an Etihad point of view, that there'll be some natural hedges within that, particularly on currency. So the capacity of this, I think, has only just begun, and I think Etihad is doing a great job of incrementally going through all parts of their business and saying, how can we affect the positivity on our partners' cost of, which means there's going to be more pressure on price from suppliers, there's going to be more pressure on price for fuel outside the market price, there's going to be more pressure on bankers and investors for cost of funds. So in a intriguing way, you have in this part of the world the huge organic built very successful airline of Emirates, and I think you are now finding another business model that may be as successful. And I think that's going to challenge the industry in a broad-based way, potentially over the next 10 years, in an industry that is increasingly difficult to operate in. So it's going to put pressure on everyone who are linked to airlines in a different way that I think we never imagined.
You said it's a new model. Are others emulating it?
I think it is a new model, and I think what they've done is their timing of Etihad's timing of buying these, putting equity into these ventures was amazing. And, you know, the turnaround of jet has partly been because oil prices gone down like that. Now you can use those funds to restore the business in these opportunistic times. So it's, I think it's been a very brave, and it looks like it's becoming a very successful business model, which I think surprises everyone.
Richard, you talked about putting pressure on suppliers. Is that something you're seeing from this model?
Flowing down all layers of supply chain? I think that's definitely...
From airlines.
From airlines. Well, again, perhaps I can't comment directly on airlines themselves, but into the supply chain that we deal with, which is typically the big companies that are making the significant assemblies that go into these aircraft. Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about protectionism. I come from Washington, D.C., where there's obviously some big political battles going on now. The big carriers are challenging the rights of the carriers from this region of the world to exercise their open skies rights. There's political pressure to block Norwegian's application to fly new low-fare routes to the United States. Is there a danger that increased protectionism could slow the growth in the long-haul airline market? Maybe you want to take that hot potato?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course, I think in the future, in the upcoming competition going forward, everybody has to be stronger because, you know, it's going to be, every country has to be more open skies. For instance, like Indonesia. Indonesia is now very tough for either creating the barriers or accept the open skies. But the only options now is, yeah, we have to compete with others, or we have to cooperate. Because if we are talking about maybe between developed country compared with developing countries, in some certain level, developing countries need to protect their own national carriers. For instance, like in Southeast Asia or in any other part of the world. But of course, in terms of the competition among the carriers, there is no barrier at all at this moment. And everybody has to see this part of the competition, part of giving a better service, better product, better price into the marketplace.
Joe, if I could, I'd like to make a comment on that too. From where I sit in Europe, and I see what's happening, and for a small airline like ours, which is unaligned, it's not part of any of the three big alliances, actually I see big problems because it is lessening competition, and it's actually making it more difficult for smaller airlines like this to fly across the Atlantic because the regulators are actually approving these cartels or these blocks. And so it's hard for a small airline like ours to get access to the market because point-to-point opportunities in our business are there, but they're limited. And so I get it. There's always the push and pull of competition versus a protection. But I mean, my comment is based on what I'm seeing from where we sit, and I think that it's going to be increasingly difficult for airlines like ours as we get marginalised and sort of left out of this coalition or the coalitions that seem to be formed certainly across the Atlantic.
Moving on to workforce. There's been a lot of speculation about a so-called global skills crisis. Is that really a problem? Let's start with you, Richard. Is that really a problem, and how big is it?
Sure. I mean, it's very much a problem. There's, and it's a very well documented problem. Although there have been lots of claims of scaremongering, perhaps a little bit overinflated as a problem statement. But the facts are there. You have to start with the environment we find ourselves in, which is that we are, as a world, then we're living in a fast pace, which is created by, of course, a global population explosion. We've got the emerging markets, I think have been mentioned already, and the emerging middle classes within those emerging markets. And then you layer on top of that an aging population, which is, if I take just, in North America, then the FAA has, I think, put next year on the map as the year that the aging population really kicks in with the strength. I think something like 40% of the scientific, technical engineering workforce are starting a retirement cycle. That's a significant gap that it's going to leave. And then put another layer of technology and the pace of technology, and in particular, most importantly, the adoption rate of technology. And the net result is you have a world which is requiring more than it did before. It's requiring it faster than it did before and better. And of course, that means you need skilled resources that also are going to put these products, first of all, to design them and then to put them into production.
So what's the answer? What do? You don't wait for the government to act, do you?
No, you don't. You don't. I mean, let me maybe put a size on it, because you did ask for a size of the problem. And there are lots of people who have commented on this, and some very reputable names. So if you look at it from my home, then in the UK, for instance, UK Engineering, the Royal Academy of Engineers put the UK's skills gap at around about 1 million engineers between now and 2020. That's a big gap. One of my favourite scaremongers, though, globally is McKinsey, who are putting that gap somewhere around about 4.5 million in the same time frame. So, and that relates roughly to about a 75% deficit in terms of the demand versus what the globe is going to require in incremental skills. So there are things that are being done. So there are various government initiatives. People are looking at essentially the making more engineers. So, and they're doing it by trying to encourage, of course, children into STEM-based careers. There are programs like apprenticeships that are trying to encourage, again, young adults to take a technical career path. But unfortunately, there's a leakage throughout that entire system. We have youngsters that are not choosing to take STEM careers, or take STEM subjects, sorry. And then when they finally make it through their schooling life, then they're choosing to not take a technical career option. So the net result of that is creating those kind of those gaps that I was mentioning in terms of the size. So we have to take matters somewhat into our own hands. Now there are lots of ways that you can do this, both as a manufacturer or as a product development company like ours. And so we look at it in 3 ways. Your challenges typically are, you need the capacity to create your product in the first place. You need to look at the processes you're using to create those products. And then you need to make sure that your entire business is well connected, that entire enterprise is well connected throughout the product realization lifecycle. And that's easier said than done. There's lots of different models to do it. But I think, one, and perhaps for the sake of time today, that I'd like to maybe leave the audience thinking about is, we have a topic, again, that we look very seriously on ourselves, but also we work with our customers on. And it's the topic we call irresponsible consumption. Now, think of it this way, is that as any asset becomes scarce, then you need to make sure, of course, that your use of it, your consumption of it is appropriate, that you're taking care of that scarce resource. Now, in engineers, then there are, again, lots of studies, including our own, which point to the fact that an engineer's daily life typically involves around about 80% of their time on non-engineering activity. And we call that essential but non-value-added work. So you have to do it. The process of creating products and putting them into production means it has to get done, but you don't necessarily need highly skilled, highly qualified engineers in order to perform those tasks. So we undertake a process then of basically disaggregating that daily life into business processes and making sure that we can identify the work that must be done by engineers, first and foremost, the core work, and then progressively distributing that work then against a much wider resource, but also a globally distributed resource, to try and access those pockets where there is, in some cases, a little bit of surplus that you can get access to.
I think there's just one point on what Richard was saying about there are many industries that are long and many industries that are short resource. And I think generally digital technology industries have had a shortage, and we can learn from those industries how they dealt with their problems. And flexibility, I think, is an important thing. Young people coming through the system have a very different attitude, are up for career changes, and I think it's up to the industry as a whole to do the running on this. The people are there. It's just, so some of the things that Richard said I think are very, very valid, and getting more optimization, but attracting people, retraining people, breeding your place of work as somewhere where great people want to work is now there. The competition for great people is everywhere. So I think it's not about, you know, there's a problem. I think there's got to be some self-help.
Alex, I think it's an excellent point, actually. We as the industry have a responsibility to engage with the particular problem and to go out there and be part of the classrooms. Another big area of significant issue is the diversity problem that we have. If you, again, look at you know, children that are making choices to go into technical careers, then it's as progressively you get to a stage with those STEM qualifications, then as many as 50% of young ladies, for instance, are choosing to not go into a technical career, having got the foundational technical skills in their education. So there's a huge leakage there, and we have to reach out as an industry and embrace all of the potential parts of the workforce to take a technical career up. The good news for people who are choosing to do that, actually, is that because of the skill shortage, of course, the rates, the salary scales are very high right now. So as a choice which, again, perhaps as a young graduate, you may have been looking at, should I go and be an engineer now? I'm graduated as an engineer, or do I go into the city, Alex? Then perhaps now the choice isn't quite so obvious that the city is the way to make some money. And now the career route and the opportunities to earn well in engineering are well established.
When we talked about engineers, it also extends to pilots and things like that. Dane, how does a smaller airline like Air Serbia compete for and retain talent?
Well, thankfully we don't have a fleet of, you know, 100 or 200 aircraft, so it makes our job a little bit easier. Easier, not easy. Of course, when you run an airline, if you don't have pilots, you don't have an airline, so they're probably the first amongst equals. So they're a pretty critical bunch of guys to make sure that you have enough of. Look, the cost of living in Serbia is significantly less than what it is elsewhere. People don't come to Serbia because, you know, they want to enrich themselves beyond their wildest dreams. Far from it. But Serbs are fairly, how shall I say, people who love their country, and Serbia has seen a flight of people over the last 20 years due to the problems that we have had in Serbia. And as the situation has improved, people want to come back. I spent the last 20 years of my life living in Asia, and the last 10 of which were in Singapore. It was amazing how many Serbs and people from ex-Yugoslavia there were working for Singapore Airlines, Tiger Air and Silk Air. And they all pined for wanting to go back to Serbia. And so now it's funny that I'm in Serbia running this airline, how many have expressed a desire to come back. So people don't come back because of money. There are other altruistic sort of desires and reasons why people do what they do. People have come back because they want to live in Serbia, and Serbia as a country, the economic situation is improving. We now have an airline which is far and away the best airline in the region, and there's a reason to come back. So we have a good pool, but it doesn't mean that, you know, at the other end, you know, young up-and-coming pilots I talk about now also want to go through what these guys did 20 years ago and go and make monies and what have you. So in the main, we're not so challenged. We have good relations with our pilots and our staff, and, you know, it's been fairly collaborative from 2013, and that's been the difference for us.
Yeah, we have bonus on demography. I mean, the middle class society is now increasing. But of course, what we are facing now is how to speed up the total skilled workers and engineers in order to cover the growth on the aviation industry, in Indonesia especially. Because maybe for the last 3 years, the pilot is quite really lack of pilot available in the market. But now by speeding up the pilot academy, pilot school, it can be solved, this problem. But now what we are facing is the necessity, the requirement of the additional engineer and skilled workers, because in terms of maintaining the aircraft, not the only rely on the new airplane, but of course the current maintenance and repair organization will need more. We still need around 400 a year engineer and skilled workers to maintain the airplane.
We're just winding down on time, but we promised the audience to talk about infrastructure. And I wanted to ask, I was just in Singapore, and they're building a 5th terminal and getting ready for a 6th, but that's Singapore. What are the infrastructure pain points? Where are the infrastructure pain points, and what are they? And you know, is infrastructure keeping up with traffic growth?
Well, maybe just from a financing of infrastructure point of view, there is a, and I guess it goes for the whole industry as well, there is an absolute need now for diversity of source of funds. New banking regulation that is affecting us globally, subsequent to the 2008 crisis, is now restricting banks much more rigorously on being borrowing short and lending long. And infrastructure finance of all kinds needs long-term finance, as well as, you know, commercial airlines need long-term finance. So one of the important enablers now is to broaden into different investment groups through capital markets, infrastructure finance. Infrastructure bonds are now going to become more and more important. Maybe plain individual bonds for individual planes, both in a conventional format and very suitable for an Islamic format, which is, I think, will over the next 10 years be another source of diversification. So in order to build the infrastructure, if you haven't got government equity and you need a portion of debt, anyone who is doing it needs to really think through where are they going to find those sources of debt financing, because it is not a matter of ringing up the bank anymore. The regulations have cut the banks to an extent out of this market, certainly in a heavy way. So, and the energy industry has also seen similar issues over the last 5 or 6 years. So this is going to develop on a much broader plan.
Anyone else? Okay, well, we're coming in on an on-time finish. I wanted to thank you, gentlemen, for all your insights and sharing with us. It was a good session.
Thank you.